Hello everyone, Chris Girata here, and I'm really excited about this new video series that we're doing. As a parent, I know that this has been an extraordinary kind of experience to parent children through this pandemic. And especially given that we can't be together physically, we can't lean on one another, learn from one another, support one another physically, it makes the whole thing even harder. And so I'm very glad that we have a chance to do this video series with you all to try and be helpful, try and offer some words of wisdom, ideas that we have, things that will hopefully help you as you parent and help all of us as we parent together. And so I'm glad to be able to kick off this series with you all. And it's a little bit daunting to be asked to speak on some kind of idea of parenting to other parents when I myself am still trying to figure all of that out. We kind of do our best, we stay faithful, we keep our energy up as best we can, but certainly none of us have all the answers. And so I'm just gonna talk for a few minutes on an idea that I think will be helpful to all of us. And that's really about personalities of our children, the way that our children differ in certain personality groups. I'm gonna go from one perspective, but there's another perspective I want to encourage you to consider before we kick off. And the first, that perspective is really about the Enneagram. Enneagram is one of those words, ideas that I was unfamiliar with a few years ago. And I have since gained familiarity, and I think it's just brilliant. The Enneagram effectively has 9 different types. People are put into those types very intentionally, and by being put in those types helps explain, express, identify, understand different ways of being. In particular, this has a spiritual component, and I think that's what makes the Enneagram so beautiful. I don't have time to tell you a lot more about it right now, but I want to really encourage you to consider learning more about it, and St. Michael will help. We happen to have one of the finest Enneagram teachers in really around, but especially here in Dallas, and that's Mary Lessman. Mary has been an Enneagram student and teacher for years and years. She is really excellent, and she's been offering Enneagram classes here at St. Michael for a long time. She will this coming spring, so that's spring of 21, offer a class specifically geared toward parents raising kids at home. In order to take that class, which I think is going to be amazing, you need to take the first kind of prereq Enneagram course. Just familiarize yourself with the Enneagram, understand your own type, how you communicate, especially within your marriage or within your families. And that will help you go deeper with the parenting specific class in the spring. In order to take that class, you got to get on it. Mary's class begins in September. And so please email Mary. We're going to drop her email right below. You can also find her email address online, read more about the Enneagram class that starts this fall, and sign up for it now because it will fill up. And we want to make sure that as many parents as possible can join us in the spring for what I think is going to end up being a brilliant class. Similarly to the Enneagram, I want to talk about a different way of understanding personalities with your children, something that's been pretty helpful to Nicole and me, and that is an idea that came out decades ago at this point called the 5 love languages. Remember that? 5 love languages? It was very popular back in the day. It has remained very popular ever since. And Gary Chapman, who wrote this book, has extended the idea of love languages to children and marriages and work and all that good stuff. Here's the basic premise. There are 5 ways to express and receive love. Those 5 ways are physical touch, gifts, words of affirmation, acts of service, and quality time. I'll say them again. Physical touch, gifts, words of affirmation, acts of service, and quality time. Effectively, what Chapman argues is that we all define the giving and receiving of love in one of those ways primarily. Now, none of us are locked into a specific way, but Nicole and I have found, as we've talked through this with each other in our marriage and also about our children, that everyone sort of has a primary and a secondary. And if you can identify that primary and secondary, it helps communication so much more effectively. Now, this, by the way, is super helpful within your marriage, but since today is about parenting, I want to offer some ideas about how this can be really helpful as a parent. So we're going to kind of bust through each of those ways in just a few minutes, and then I'm going to talk about how that actually has been helpful to me. Okay, so first off, we're going to talk about physical touch. So physical touch would be expressed through cuddling and hugging and touching. And you may have a child or know of children who it seems like all they want to do is touch you. They want to kind of be right next to you when you sit down on the sofa. They come and they sit practically on you, or they lean on you, or they squirm into you. All of that is about physical touch. Physical touch is a way for them to genuinely express their love and receive love. What that means is when a child is 3 or 4 and they come screaming through the house to give you a hug when you get home from work or back from a store or something like that, that feels really good. As children age, that kind of touch can become a little bit more annoying if your own love language is not physical touch. As children age and become awkward and smelly and all that stuff, I encourage you to continue to express love physically because it matters to those children. And some of the ways that this, the rubber hits the road is one pitfall, which is around some kind of corporal punishment. I know that spanking isn't necessarily as popular as it used to be, but that kind of physical touch in a negative way can actually make a really poor impact on a child whose love language is physical touch, right? A spanking hurts physically, anybody. But for a child whose love language is that physical touch, it is devastating. And so on the one hand, you've got the opportunity to just cuddle and hug more. And on the other hand, you've got that pitfall to watch out for, which is whereas some children may respond to that kind of physicality in a punitive sense, other children will not, and it will really, really harm your relationship with a child whose love language is physical touch. Second, gifts. Now, this is sort of like, whose love language isn't gifts, but we all know people whose love language for gifts is a little different, right? And this is not about receiving or having stuff in that materialistic sense. This is about the emotion and the consideration behind the gift giving. Now, in my house, when I was a kid, we would always get gifts from both of our parents, even though it was pretty obvious my dad had no idea what the gifts were until we opened them. And that's maybe a little more common than it should be. I will tell you that for someone whose love language is gift, that's receiving and giving. And the idea behind this is that they really want to know you cared to think about doing a thing, right? It's similar to acts of service, which we'll get to, but it's more specifically around you saw a thing, you thought of that person. It's not really based on value of the gift at all. It's about the intention behind the gift. And that kind of expression is really a positive for a kid who wants to feel loved in that way. A common way of considering whether this is your child is, are they kind of nostalgic about stuff, right? They get a little bauble or a little tchotchke or a little note or something like that, and they kind of keep everything and they put it in a box, or they put it on a shelf, or they just don't want to get rid of anything. That's the kind of child whose likely love language is gifts, because the gift is not about the thing. The gift is about the person who gave the gift. And if they throw a gift away, they're almost saying that they don't love that person. And for those of us who don't speak that love language, that doesn't necessarily make sense. But I think we can all understand how that feels. And so that's the child who's going to have more difficult time throwing away toys they no longer play with or use, and on and on. One of the common pitfalls of this is that a person whose love language is gifts can overdo it and can put too much weight on it. And that's one of the things as a parent that you can kind of find a balance, is how much to give and how much to receive, and to be graceful in both ways. So, third love language is one that I really think makes sense to a lot of people, and that's words of affirmation. Words of affirmation is grounded in the actual words spoken to people. These are people who don't really feel the love unless they hear you say it out loud. For people who define their love language with words of affirmation, this makes total sense. For others who speak a different love language, we have to be reminded to say these things out loud, that sometimes a child in particular needs to hear the words said. I don't know how many TV shows and movies have, created conflict based on something left unsaid, right? Well, I always knew my dad loved me because he did X, Y, and Z, but never said it. And then you have these moving emotional moments where, some parent finally says to the child that they love them and the child breaks down and cries and all these stuff. That kind of conflict is developed around this lack of understanding that words of affirmation matter. And in a similar way to physical touch, where a spanking hurts everybody, but it devastates someone whose love language is physical touch, words of affirmation can cut both ways. On the one hand, actually saying you love a child over and over verbally matters in a huge way to children whose love language is words of affirmation. On the flip side, saying things like you're disappointed or saying hurtful words not only kind of sting, but they can genuinely devastate. I mean, people whose love language is words of affirmation just carry those words forever. And so as a parent, being aware if your child needs those words also means that you've got to watch how you use those words in that punitive sense. The fourth love language is acts of service. Acts of service is a strange sounding love language, but effectively it's where you express your love by doing something, and you receive love by people doing something in return. And so these are the kinds of children who may want more attention and help doing stuff. So that may mean help carrying groceries or their backpack, help tying their shoes. But they're also the kinds of kids who will want to help in return in physical ways. They may be the ones who are interested in folding laundry or helping to clean a table or to straighten things in the house, because they express their love for you by physically touching and doing things. Now, these children can be pretty annoying because they tend to ask for a lot. They tend to want you to do a lot for them, but it's because in the doing, you're not just serving a spoiled child. What you're doing is you're actually showing them physically that you love them. And in return, if you nurture this kind of idea, I think there's a danger here in allowing a child to become a brat and become spoiled. But for the child whose love language is acts of service, they'll be super receptive to your encouragement over the years to actually do for others, including within your household and for you as a parent. And so if a child seems to want your physical help a lot to do things that you really think they could do on their own, it's likely that their love language is that acts of service, so that when you do help them, they're feeling loved. And so as a child grows, my encouragement would be to continue to give them opportunities to help serve back, and that will make a big impact. Finally, the last love language is quality time. This probably doesn't need a lot of explanation. I mean, it's pretty straightforward in the sense that a child who wants to just do things with you, wants you to come and look at this, always wants to take you and show you a thing, or sit with you and read a book, or play a game, and just wants you near them, differently perhaps than physical touch, but wants almost like this active time with you. Spending the time shows them that they are loved. And in return, they want to be spending time with you in a way that, for someone who doesn't speak this language, could become frustrating because it actually takes time. And time is one of those things we can't get back. But knowing that a child wants that quality time with you is really, really important. So here's a pitfall when it comes to children with quality time. How often do we hear people say, you know, a child does something wrong, a parent says, go to your room? For many children, going to their room, you know, is annoying and frustrating and might be kind of helpful. For a child whose love language is quality time, being banished, so to speak, on their own really hurts. And so on the one hand, it can be very effective. On the other hand, it can hurt. And so something just to watch out for. In our own families, there's the rundown of the 5. In our own family, we found that talking with our kids about the way that they express and receive love is actually quite helpful. We have figured out that we have 4 of the 5 languages within the 5 in our household. And naming those things helps to express frustration when you don't feel the love, and also provides an opportunity for people to show love more often. If you and your spouse, you and your children have different love languages, then it's easy without awareness to find that you're very frustrated and short and angry and exhausted. If you can identify those love languages, name them for each other, be aware of them with each other, then I think that you're going to find that although nobody's perfect and you will make mistakes, being able to name it with one another and effectively apologize and move forward in a responsible way is going to be super helpful. I know this video has gone a little longer than it's supposed to, but I hope this gives you a little nugget to consider, maybe an encouragement to explore. The original book is The 5 Love Languages. Chapman wrote a book a few years after this one was published called The 5 Love Languages of Children. And same 5 languages, but he really fleshes out and exposes the way that these love languages express themselves in early childhood, in elementary school, as teenagers, and I think that you will find it very helpful. And what I want to do is encourage you to not just keep this information to yourself, but bring your children in. Let them know, make them more aware of the way that they express and receive love so that they can also be more loving to you in return. I hope you all are doing well in this pandemic, that school has started without too much of a hitch. I miss seeing you all in person and look forward to when we can be back together safely. So know you are in my prayers, and I hope I'm in yours. And I look forward to another video with you all very soon. God bless.